ahead and click that. So for anyone that wasn't able to be here today, they can go ahead and rewatch this later. And we will also be watching the chat throughout the presentation. So if you do have questions for John as he's sharing this information, please make sure to put those in the chat so that we can go ahead and do those short Q&A at the end, and so he can answer those questions. And it looks like he just didn't become a panelist, so I'm not sure what's happening here. Give me just a second. Looks like he said he'll be right back. Hold on, here we go. All right.
How exciting is that? So many technology things.
We got it figured out.
Well,
All
of course,
right.
you have to enable this, enable permissions for microphone, enable permissions for video, enable permissions for share screen. Oh, wait, you have to quit and reopen if you want to share your screen.
Well, with that start here, everyone, I'm sure a lot of you probably know who John is at this point already, but just for those of you who are unaware, our guest presenter today is John Fink. He's a senior research associate and program lead at the Community College Research Center. John is nationally recognized expert on transfer pathways, dual enrollment, guided pathways reform with a strong focus on improving outcomes for traditionally underserved students. And today he's going to be sharing some insights from his analysis of Ohio's transfer data, along with some practical action steps we can take as a state to better support our student mobility and success. So we're very excited to have him here with us today, and I will let him go ahead and get started. So thank you, John.
Awesome. And thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. It's good to be with you all. Yes, here we are. We often learn this best from our students. You just got to stick with it when you encounter obstacles. The barriers to presenting and sharing your screen virtually are no match, especially for transfer students, which are transition experts and are so good at navigating complex bureaucracies, which is, of course, an important training for life. I'm going to be talking about improving community college transfer pathways and what we have learned from our research partnership in Ohio over the years. A lot of what we at the CCRC have learned, we actually have synthesized into a book that's forthcoming this fall, just in a couple of months, called More Essential Than Ever, Community College Pathways to Educational and Career Success. Of course, as I'll share, a big part of community college mission is helping students transfer, get a bachelor's and graduate degree. And we have sort of written in this book our learnings over the years, including much research in Ohio about implementations of guided pathways reforms, strengthening transfer pathways, including starting it through high school dual enrollment or CCP. And just wanted to make sure everyone's aware that we have this book coming out in the fall. We'll actually be there for folks at the community colleges. We'll actually be at the SSLI meeting hosted by the Ohio Association of Community Colleges in September, talking about our book. So in community colleges, we talk a lot about workforce development. Of course, this is crucial to state goals and to communities and what students want. I do want to just, reiterate and connect here that bachelor's degree transfer is workforce development too. It is very much about getting bachelor's degrees and graduate degrees and all that good stuff. But this, we know in many communities, is increasingly important to get and secure a good job, one that's going to pay a living wage with benefits, and that's going to grow and develop into a lifelong career. And this is sort of just shown here in the data of like, where's the growth in these so-called good jobs? Much of the growth is in this blue bar, the bachelor's degree pathway. And we know that this is especially important for community college students, most of which want a bachelor's degree. But when we look at like just who's enrolled at community colleges today at a typical college, here's generally what we find is that most students are not enrolled in a program that clearly leads to a good job or transfer in a major. And if you look at a typical community college, which we work with hundreds nationally, you see that a large chunk of students are in high school. Many students are undecided. Probably the biggest program at most colleges are general transfer, liberal arts, general studies, and then you have these sort of smaller, more CTE programs. And one of the theses of the book that's coming out is just, what motivation do students have to continue and complete in these programs if it's sort of unclear what this is leading to for them? And that's especially a challenging question with transfer, because the community college doesn't award the bachelor's degree. Students have to go and transfer and meet with professors at a different institution to get the bachelor's degree. So all that exciting stuff about like, ooh, I'm interested in psychology, sociology, history, computer science. That's really oftentimes the four-year faculty that students are interested in wanting to connect to, and that seems very distant from where they are when they start at a community college. And this can be some of the challenge with community college transfer outcomes, and of course how those credits are transferring. We know credit transfer is a big issue nationally. Here's a national study just showing that, like just over half of students were able to transfer most of their credits going from community college to university. Many, 15%, like basically had to start over. And of course, this is an issue for the sort of, the economics and like losing tuition and wasted resources. But actually, this study found that students that were able to transfer most of their credits were actually much more likely to complete a bachelor's. And so, especially given that transfer associate degrees and programs don't have much labor market value unless students complete the bachelor's degree, that likelihood of completing the bachelor's is very important to really realize all the benefits of that community college associate's degree. Um, I think I've shared here before, but this is some of our national research that when we look at transfer outcomes nationally, most students entering community college do want to transfer and get a bachelor's, but nationally only about a third of students ever enroll at a four-year institution within a 6-year time span. So, about a third are just making the leap to a four-year. Most aren't enrolling in a four-year institution. And fewer than 1 in 5 students complete a bachelor's over that time period. So many fewer than sort of seek to get a bachelor's degree. And in our recent work using National Student Clearinghouse data with the Aspen Institute, we find that not only are these low outcomes, but there's high disparities. When we look at subpopulations that are less likely to hold a bachelor's degree, sort of generally in the adult population, this system of transfer is not only low performing, but has a disproportionate impact on these populations. Black students, Hispanic, Native American, low income students, and older adult students entering community college have particularly low transfer rates and completion rates among transfer. But this is a very like kind of nerdy chart, but I love it so much. I want to tell you what it means. This is looking at those transfer outcomes, but it's looking at each state and the variation in institutional performance, community college performance within each state. And these are different, outcomes. So you have the transfer out rates here, the transfer out bachelor completion rates here, and then that sort of what percent get a bachelor's, they transfer and they complete a bachelor's in 6 years. And so if we just look at, say, like the rate at which transfer students are completing a bachelor's degrees in the middle, what it shows you is that, yes, there are some differences by state, like some states tend to do better than others. But if you look within states, there's a lot more variation. And I don't know if you can see where I'm hovering, but Ohio, it's very small, but it's sort of down here in the bottom third. And you can see that, like, there is a state average for Ohio, but there's, a bunch of colleges above that average and a bunch below. So there's this sort of range of performance within each state. And I think what this shows is that, really in any state, there are exemplary institutions that have much stronger transfer outcomes than others, including in Ohio. So some are doing much better than others. And that's really what's motivated what I'm going to spend my last part of this talk talking about our findings from the transfer playbook, where we visited the strongest performing institutions to see what they're doing. But basically, all these dots are just showing you that some colleges have stronger outcomes than others. And sort of as researchers, we like variation, we like differences because you can go and learn from those places what's working well. But if you look across states, I said 16% of students overall are entering community college, transferring and getting a bachelor's. Even the best state, it's still below 25%. So let's look at Ohio, of course. If you just look at entering community college students, what percent transfer and complete a bachelor's degree? Nationally, it's 16%. In Ohio, it's 11% of entering community college students transfer and complete a bachelor's degree. And one thing I do want to note, so that is low, but as is the case nationally and in most states, including Ohio, students who are entering that transfer journey, starting at community college after high school, on their pathway to a bachelor's degree. So students who are starting at community college with prior dual enrollment, so they have some college credit plus, some CCP in their background, and then they're starting at community college, they are 3 times more likely to transfer and complete a bachelor's degree. And we see this in most states, that one of the biggest opportunities for improving transfer outcomes and transfer bachelor completion is to better think about dual enrollment, CCP, as an on-ramp to that transfer pathway. And we find that that is consistent across these different groups, Black students, Latino students, low-income students that have lower bachelor's attainment. So I think that was a key insight from this report. We have a dashboard on our website where you can go and sort of like look more in a detailed way at Ohio's transfer outcomes and compare it to national outcomes. And so this is for Ohio's community colleges. There's a transfer out rate, what percent of students are transferring to a 4-year institution. The transfer with award rate is what percent of transfer students are transferring with an associate degree or certificate from the community college. Most of that is an associate degree. The transfer out bachelor completion rate, that's what percent of transfer students are completing the bachelor's at any institution. And then the cohort bachelor's, that's of all entering students, how many transfer and complete a bachelor's degree. And you can see that, compared to the national average, Ohio's community colleges, they are slightly lower in terms of the transfer outcomes. But do remember, in that nerdy sort of chart, there is a lot of variation. So some colleges are performing much above that average, that statewide average. And I'll just show you kind of a couple examples looking by group here. First, low-income students starting at community college, they have lower transfer and completion rates. So they're sort of disproportionately impacted by this challenging transfer system. Black students, similarly, higher disparities there. Again, for Hispanic students and for older adult students in particular, lower transfer outcomes. And we see that nationally as well as in Ohio. So you have this system of transfer that offers so much promise in terms of expanding access to the bachelor's degree, but largely is an unmet promise with a disproportionate impact on these particular populations that could really perhaps benefit the most from a bachelor's degree. And it's also, if we want to improve the overall transfer rates and completion rates, these particular populations that have lower completion rates are really the ones to focus on to move that needle overall. And that, I think, is one of the big takeaways from looking at the national transfer data and looking at Ohio. A couple other things, we didn't just look at the community colleges, though, in this analysis of National Student Clearinghouse data. We looked, too, at the 4-year institutions. And what we find is that there actually are pretty high retention rates for the community college students who do make it to the university. And I used to work at a university with community college transfer students after they arrived, and they were like incredible students, and I later sort of learned that, like, oh, that's because they've really been through the ringer in terms of getting there in the first place. But like, if they made it and they're there, they are not going anywhere. And they were rock stars. And I think our national data sort of show this to some extent. That if you look specifically among community college transfer students and those with a community college award, like an associate degree, the retention rates are very high in that first year after they transfer. So 76 to 82%, depending on which group you're looking at. And it's worth mentioning that this is higher than lateral transfers who are coming from 4-year institutions, and it is higher than non-transfers or sort of entering students, their first year retention rate. We see this nationally and in Ohio. So the retention rates are high. They're there, they're sticky. They want to stay at the institutions. They're re-enrolling. I think that's a key lesson too for upper administration in terms of retention and additional sort of course taking. But what we do see is that most students do not complete a bachelor's then. That sort of early retention in that first year doesn't always translate to completion after 4 years post-transfer. So only about 45% of students, community college transfers, completed the bachelor's 4 years after transfer. And this is at Ohio public 4-year institutions. So that was much higher, this blue bar. It's much higher for community college transfer students if they have an associate degree, if they have that community college award. So that is a key insight, that transfers with a community college award, they do fare better, but you have to remember that and look to see the fact that most students are not transferring with an award. Only about a third of Ohio's community college transfer students are arriving with an associate degree. So those students, they're kind of only a third of transfers. They were able to complete a bachelor's at much higher rates. And so I'll talk a little bit about like what do we know about why students are not completing that community college award. But before they do that, I have prepared because I know Ohio is not just the Ohio State. There's many institutions, universities in Ohio, but I had prepared this. I was just in Madison, Wisconsin, which is where I grew up, and I had prepared a special Big Ten Community College Transfer Outcome Challenge, which just felt like relevant to share today with you all. In our research with the clearinghouse data, we can't identify specific institutions and their outcomes, but largely drawing on our framework for research, the Department of Education a couple of years ago did release public institution level data on community college transfer outcomes that very similarly mimicked the outcomes that I just showed you. So what I have done is I've just pulled the stats on all the Big Ten colleges, and I thought that we could have a little bit of a tournament here. I know it's not quite March Madness yet, but you can never be too ready. Just facing off these Big Ten schools. So here we go. Let's see. All right, so Wisconsin beats out Nebraska. Purdue beats out Minnesota. This is about the bachelor completion rate among community college transfer students in this one particular cohort. So this is showing you their sort of what percent of their community college transfer students are completing a bachelor's when they arrive at that institutions. All right, so I'll just sort of play this out. You can see, I believe that O is for the Ohio State. The Ohio State, I think, got kicked out on the first round of the tournament here, only with a 60% bachelor completion rate among their community college transfers, and got beat out by Illinois. Sorry to say there. Maryland is advancing, Michigan's advancing, Iowa, Wisconsin going into the next round. Illinois is coming in hot with a 76% bachelor completion rate. And so if you just kind of play this out, you can see that, oh, actually the winner here is your neighbor, the Fighting Illini, University of Illinois, with an 89% bachelor completion rate among their community college transfer students. Granted, it is a smaller number. It's only 207. So you could sort of argue that for some of these larger institutions, maybe they're having more of an access effect there. But nevertheless, you can kind of see that there is a range of performance as to how even these, Big Ten colleges, which I would say tend to have many more resources to support these students and can be more selective in their admissions for these students compared to other four-year institutions. But nevertheless, there is still a range of performance. And I thought that this Big Ten tournament style would be a fun way to illustrate that. All right, so just pause and reflect. This would be where we'd have a discussion, but I think I'm going to just sort of move through to the next part of the presentation. But just take a moment to reflect yourself. Any new question raised or a new insight or a new data point that struck you of interest, you can throw it into the chat, or just sort of pause and reflect. All right. Thank you, everyone. Now we're going to kind of go to Act 2. The first thing, though, I wanted to share is one data point that has always really stuck out to me among all my years of kind of looking at this transfer data. It was working with a particular community college and one of their transfer partners. And what I was hearing from them was that, we're a big community college. We have these transfer partnerships. They want us to sort of be like exclusive with them, like really encourage students to go to that university. And, they're kind of concerned about all these students going to this other university in the area. And, what can we do to sort of sweeten the relationship there? I wonder if any of this sounds familiar to you all. But when we were looking at the data with this institution and this particular partnership, I mean, essentially they're fighting over pieces of the pie, of that transfer pie. And when we looked at this institution, they had, among all students who started for the first time at their community college, there were like 2,500 students. And they found that, okay, 178 of them went to your university. Thank you. And that university was like, how can we sweeten the pot here? We need to get more into this pie. Look at these 439 transfer students who went to some other institution. How can we get a bigger slice of that pie? And that was the conversation, and they were kind of stuck there. But one thing that was really helpful that this college did is they showed this institution, this transfer institution, this transfer partnership, the much bigger chunk slice of the pie of students who are not transferring anywhere over a 6-year span of time. They're not even showing up at any university, any four-year institution in the area or in the state or in the country. So this never transferred group actually turned out to be a very large piece of the pie that everyone was missing out on. And that really got them thinking about this group who's not transferring at all. Where are we losing them? What they found is most of them are sort of here for a semester and then just totally gone forever, or here for the first year and totally gone forever. So they got really thinking about that first semester, first year experience. How are we helping students see through to that path of transfer and bachelor's completion from the entry point instead of on the way out? And that's just always stuck with me as a key data point. So hopefully folks are looking similarly at all the folks who aren't transferring. So part of what we've learned in our research in Ohio is that early momentum, that first year for transfer in a 6-year period. So it seems so far away, but really what happens in that first year is crucial for community college students. And students who attain this early momentum, they're able to hit certain credit thresholds like 12, 24 college level credits, Path Math or English. In that first year at community college, they are much more likely to not only transfer, but complete a bachelor's degree. And that sort of increased likelihood of gaining early momentum has these additional benefits for these particular priority populations like Black and Hispanic students and low income students. So we know that early momentum matters. One piece of research we did in Ohio and a couple other states, and that really, I think it was basically the partnership with ODHE like made this happen, and the sort of OAT and like the transfer group there, was we looked specifically at the program momentum and taking the right courses for the bachelor's degree in a major. And this utilized the fact that y'all have these OGTPs. Yeah, you know me, Ohio Guaranteed Transfer Pathways, major specific recommended course sequences with sort of statewide, sort of connection to the courses students are taking. And this was an NSF study. And so we specifically focused on STEM bachelor's completers who started at a community college. And we found that, among all transfer intending, so students with the transfer intent entering community colleges in Ohio, state A, I should say. This is state A. It was only 3% of those students completed a STEM bachelor's degree. We did see too that students who hit 24 college level credits, so that's a pretty good like momentum point in their first year, that STEM bachelor completion rate went up to 9% for those students. But this is where the magic happened. We looked specifically at these OGTP courses on the STEM pathways. Of course, math is a huge thing for a STEM and really for any student, especially in STEM. And so we were able to identify students who took sort of the prerequisite to calculus, we call it calculus foundations, as well as students who actually completed calculus in their first year at community college. But we were also able we looked at these, we call them STE pathways, but these are essentially like the organic chemistry, like the bio, like the courses that are that first like major course on the OGTP that students have to take in order to get into the major once they transfer. This is really like the crucial courses for students. Oftentimes these had a prerequisite. We called it a STE foundation. This would be like your intro chem or your intro bio courses. And anyway, all that to say is that we found that students, not just who accumulated 24 of any credits, but specifically students who were accumulating and hitting these key program momentum milestones like calculus foundations or calculus or STE foundation or STE pathway off of those OGTP courses, they were much more likely, it's still like 24, 26%, but that's completing a STEM bachelor's degree, and that's much higher, especially when you look at the baseline of 3% for all transfer intending. So I thought that this was pretty insightful to know that these, taking and passing these courses on the state and faculty approved sort of pathways does seem to really have a big difference for STEM completion. Of course, the big caveat is that very few students are taking those courses. So we basically saw that among all students, it was like single digits, like 4 to 5% of entering community college students are completing those courses in their first year. So, you might think, okay, for calculus, we might, maybe they need to get into that their second year, but even the completing the calculus foundations or the STE foundation, relatively few students are completing those courses. And that was true across groups. So I think one of the insights here is just how are we helping students not just explore their interests, but then get into the right courses that are on that major aligned pathway in that first year. So I do want to just make sure we have some time for questions, and I did want to sort of just make folks aware of this updated transfer playbook. So I'm going to go really quickly through this, and we can talk about it. We have this PDF published on our website. It has a lot of examples from the field. So we went to about a dozen institutions across the country with the strongest transfer outcomes. And just sort of met at the community college and university with faculty, students, administrators, advisors, and sort of just learned what are these strategies. And in this transfer playbook, this is an update to one we released in 2016. It has this sort of similar 3 areas of strategies around prioritizing transfer at the presidential level, at the executive level, aligning the pathways in those major specific pathways, like I was talking about in the OGTPs, and then as well as investing in advising and sort of non-academic supports to help students along those pathways. So I do want to, so feel free to start like chiming in with questions in the chat, but I'll sort of kind of run through these strategies and just give you a little bit of a show of what is in this transfer playbook. So this first area, the first strategy, which is really kind of, I think is very essential to the rest of the other strategies, is just prioritizing and investing in transfer. It's really hard to do these other things around, bringing faculty together to think about the right pathways, getting more advisors and better training for advisors, unless you're really invested in transfer as a strategy, and not just as an enrollment strategy, as a student success strategy. And so what this looked like in our visit was president leadership, president led. Like they're talking about, the president is talking about this with the cabinet, with even the boards, board of regents, etc. They're talking about this. This is on their agenda, and that sort of allows for bigger thinking with transfer, like end-to-end redesign of the whole experience. Let's blend these community college and university worlds together so that students don't have to jump through so many hoops in their transfer process, and that our systems are not like student initiated. They're routinized, and we've built them, to just happen for students, oftentimes behind the scenes. So that's not relying on students to sort of navigate and initiate as much. We did highlight a set of different models in the playbook. This sort of gives you a sense of the sort of through line, the life cycle for students, of what we saw across these different models. I think many folks have heard about Advance in Northern Virginia, but we highlighted a few others that I think have been lesser known, like the CUNY Justice Academy, which had a major specific element, but it was similar to Advance in that it was like you start at the community college already enrolled, like in the bachelor's degree major, and then students just sort of clicked a button and it all happened for them. So we did try to highlight, different examples, and also like co-location or like university centers like Arizona Western. But basically, a couple of key things from this end-to-end redesign. First, we're starting this in high school now, y'all. Like, yes, students are starting at community college as older adults, not in high school, but increasingly many students are starting in high school. And so we now need to design for this in our transfer pathway experience, of aligning the CCP coursework to the OGTPs, for instance. A lot of simplification, a lot of guarantees, sort of like, you don't worry about this, we have you handled, you don't have to apply, you're automatically applied and admitted, with a sort of guarantee of affordability of our tuition, and this is how much it's going to cost you, and not only what is this major, but what is the connection to careers. So these are some of the sort of model elements that we observed in the transfer playbook. This was under this first strategy because this is sort of bigger picture thinking. This isn't sort of tweaking. This is really redesign, end-to-end redesign, which we only saw this when there was a big presidential, sorry, senior leadership level investment and leadership on this, to have that sort of scale of change. The second area is really about the sort of alignment of the programmatic pathways. Just think of like the good work that's happened over the years of the OGTPs and like bringing together faculty councils to sort of hammer out what is the idealized chemistry sequence. But we saw that it does need to be localized, because there are particular differences that universities will assert in their requirements. Like, my business program must require calculus, which is, that one's always puzzled me. But the you know I think too, one thing that we wrote a lot about in the section of the playbook that is we learned is just as important for these high performing institutions is the pedagogical alignment. So our students so we get the faculty together, they're talking about the teaching and learning in these programs, and are they prepared to succeed in that upper level biology class based on how they're being taught in that 1 or 200 level biology class at the community college. One of the examples is like how they're doing lab reports. At the community college, we were doing them all handwritten in journals, and then at the university, it's all in Excel. And so like they had to figure that out because they're having a big issue with more of that pedagogical element. The last thing I'll just talk about, we did really sort of dig into the advising models of these partnerships. There's a lot of different ways to do advising, but some common elements we saw was like shared sort of co-investment in advising. So starting those transfer conversations definitely up front for community college students, even before students are at community college, like when they're in high school, participating in dual enrollment, or even as a part of exploring what the community college offers, to make it clear this is a community college pathway to a bachelor's in criminal justice at blah 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 university. And that really being the increasing strategy for starting advising early. Having smaller like all the basic stuff, smaller caseloads, more investment in staff, regular training, pay that's decent so you don't have so much turnover. Like, these are the sort of things that people were talking about. I do think the ideas are there. Oftentimes the support and investment is not, which is why we had that first section on the leadership. So anyway, let me just pause there because I want to see, what the reactions are. Did I mention we have a book coming out in August? You should check it out. Shameless plug.
So it looks like we did have one question in the chat, John. It says, when seeing these schools that are able to help connect schools for easy admission from community college to bachelor to 4 years, was there any specific technology they were using to help things make more seamless for the schools?
So the one I'm thinking of, I don't know if it's very replicable because it was CUNY. So it was like CUNY, Borough of Manhattan Community College, and CUNY John Jay Justice Academy. They're all on the same technology because it's like the same system. Although you would think they would have transfer figured out, right? You would think the whole system would have it, it's all in the same system. It still was very challenging for students, but I think because they had that shared sort of SAS, they were using DegreeWorks, that allowed them to kind of, without having to invest in an external basically solution, that allowed them to build something in-house because they had the will was there. I think on the technology piece, like, I think technology is a tool, it's a way, but what you need a will for there to be a way. So unless you have the will, the way is if you do the way without the will, it's going to be tricky. I don't know if you guys are following. But I think we've seen this in our dual enrollment research as well, because similarly, there's the questions of like, how do we engage high school counselors and connect them to our systems in a way that works? And I think there's a lot of different ways to do it, in-house and external vendors. But the most important thing is that like the program leader and the principals or the superintendent and the presidents, like, they're committed, they invest in it. and there's a real sort of desire to take the time to figure it out. That I would say is the more important piece. Good tools, standard trainings on the pedagogy side. Um, so the example I'm thinking of for the biology one with the lab was basically that it was the advanced program, and they started doing this like 10 years ago. They had an annual summit where they basically brought the faculty, not just the admissions people. Like I know, like I've been to them, y'all have probably been to them. They're very fun. Transfer summit, and oftentimes it's all the admissions and student success and all the people but the faculty. And it didn't happen overnight, but they started with a few supportive departments, and over the years they got much more widespread engagement from the academic departments at both the community college and the university. And because they would build into the schedule like breakout times for the biology faculty to talk together, which I think it sounds like from them, like they appreciated too. Like they're all neighbors, like living in the same region. They're all they probably went to the same graduate programs together. They get to talk brass tacks about their teaching and biology and align there. And like you just essentially have to just create the space for it and give a little bit of intention, but then they're off and running because they're like, yeah, well, we're always having this problem with the Nova students. They don't know how to suit up for lab on the first day. So every first day you basically have to send them home. So like they'll sort of air it out. But I think if you frame it and create the right space, and like, get people there in the room, that maybe it's easier with Zoom these days. I don't know, or maybe that sort of has its own challenges.
I mean, I definitely think there's something to the in-person. We've seen that with all of the STEM stuff you were talking about within Ohio. I mean, we have our Ohio Mathematics Initiative where we've been bringing faculty together in the same room, and it definitely does something when they're able to sit down and actually talk about, their field together and what's best for students. So,
Yeah,
see.
totally agree.
Kathy,
Major
totally agree.
changes. Major changes. This can really throw a wrench in even the best systems. Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. We actually did some research a while back in Ohio, just on community college outcomes. What we found is that like students who changed their major early actually did slightly better than your typical student. Um, for any outcome, not particular transfer. It's the late major switchers that is this wrench, right? An early major change is almost like a sign of like clarification of like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. Boom, I'm on my way. But it's the late major switchers that can be the challenge. And I think I would just tie that back to sort of the overall finding of just, is it clear from students on the front end why they're there? And exploration is great. We want students to explore, but exploration is a proactive experience. So you can't just expect students to explore on their own. Like we need, they might be Googling things, but if you really want to help them explore, we need to build that into the onboarding process for students. And for a lot of community college, the onboarding process is like, welcome to college. Here's the library. Here's the parking lot. Here's the cafeteria, etc. It's sort of like not really relevant to students' purpose of why they're there, of their program. So we talk a lot about in our guided pathways research program onboarding for new community college students, and onboarding as a process that happens not just at orientation, but really through that first semester and that first year. That to onboard students, we need to ask, connect, and inspire and help them plan. So ask them, why are you here? What are you interested in? What are your talents? What do you want to do? Connect them to similar students and faculty and other folks that can in courses that can help them explore that interest. Inspire the courses taught to these students in the first year. They should inspire them. They should light the fire for learning. Think about that in comparison to kind of going back to high school level math or English and the sort of how generic that can be. So these courses need to be inspiring and help them plan, see how that can lead them to their goals and how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. We have that conversation a lot with community college leaders. I will say for transfer students, it's really hard to connect and inspire and help them plan if the four-year partner is not at the table. So who do we need to connect you with? The faculty member in criminal justice at the university. That's probably the best person to talk with. One of the great examples was, a faculty member in criminal justice at John Jay would host like a Zoom office hours for prospective transfer students. I think he did it like once a month. Very easy ask, very meaningful for students to like go and like have the chance to talk with a professor, because that's who they want to connect with if they're interested in criminal justice. Um, so I think that in the plan, again, it's so hard to help students plan major transfer if you don't have that relationship with the 4 year on board. So as much as we say, oh, the low transfer rates, all the attrition is in the first year, this is community college's problem, it really cannot be transformed without that investment of the 4 year institution at the start with community colleges. And that's really been a main takeaway from a lot of our research.
Looks like we have a couple more minutes here. I see there's some chat going on. Does anyone have any final questions for John before we wrap up?
Let me just oh yes,
Oh, the title of your
can you
book.
please send a link to your book? No, just kidding. I mean, it's good. It's a good one. We worked a long time on it. I'll just take a little presenter's privilege to talk about the importance and still untapped potential of strengthening the transfer pathway starting in high school with CCP. Now, I know probably a lot of you might be thinking, we got all these CCP students coming into our university, they get a bajillion credits. They've taken like 30 different history courses. How are we going to help them on our history major? All right. I've heard it. I know it's true. It's grown a lot, but that is happening. And basically, the two challenges, the problems of practice with dual enrollment right now, there's actually three, but they can be highlighted by a couple of phrases. First, that we have random acts of dual enrollment. Second, that means that sort of the courses aren't always intentional, because if it's free, I'm just going to take more. Second, programs of privilege, meaning that sort of students who could really benefit the most, who might not otherwise be going to college, they're not always the ones that are taking advantage of these opportunities. And third, an office of one, meaning that many community colleges have like one or two staff serving thousands of students through these programs. And so there really is an opportunity here, though, especially with the university partners, to collaborate with the community colleges in their high school outreach to address those challenges by, first off, connecting all of this to your transfer pathways, bringing more coherence, providing that advising, working together to figure out, you get the will, you can figure out the way, figure out with community colleges and high schools, how are you going to give the right guidance and advising so that students are taking that coherent set of transfer and major applicable courses, and then doing all that outreach to the students and communities who might not otherwise know about this free college opportunity in Ohio. Especially students who are sort of in that career track in high school, might be taking a lot of CTE courses, but not CCP courses. And really, what can we do to make them aware that, hey, a lot of these college courses sound a lot like your high school career technical course, but they have that post-secondary value. And that, I think, that is not only the right thing to do, but it's actually it's an enrollment strategy, because many high school students, an increasing amount, are not going to college. They're not going anywhere. They think college is a scam, that it's not worth it. And we're talking about like 50% of the high school population in some states. Um, and so I think this is the opportunity to show students that no, college can be exciting and engaging and connected to your interests and purpose. And here's how you can start on that pathway for free in high school. Um, and so anyway, that is just my presenter's privilege, saying that there's great examples of that happening in Ohio. I'm sure maybe you all are probably the ones leading it. We're learning from it, and I always just want to take the opportunity to share what's possible when you think about dual enrollment and CCP as an on-ramp to transfer pathways, particularly for students who might not otherwise go to any college after high school.
All right. Thank you very much, John. We really appreciate the time you've taken with us today. I hope that everyone learned something new, or had a thought that they didn't have before. So I did just put our transfer email in the chat there. Most of you are probably on our OATN listserv already, but in case you are not on our Friends of OATN list, go ahead and shoot an email there. You will get information about all of our updates, and our next Transfer Talk Tuesday, which we will be announcing in the near future. So thank you again, John, and everyone have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you all.
Thank you.